So we're a little less than a year away from actual primary voting in the Republican primary, and yet we're already seeing the dynamics of the Republican primary in motion as Ron DeSantis has all but announced he's actually going to run for president. Now, previously, there was some speculation about this. A lot of people assumed that DeSantis was going to wait his turn, so to speak, in the language of some. But after the midterm elections, it was very clear that DeSantis, in his mind and in the minds of many other Republicans, certainly had a mandate to actually run in 24. Now, we're going to talk about what dynamics are currently at play in the Republican primary and what DeSantis is doing right now that strongly hints that he's going to run for president. We're going to talk later about how he's basically disclosed to private sources that he's actually going to run, and he's probably going to announce sometime in May or June. So we're going to get into all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So anyway, Ron DeSantis has long been speculated to want to run for president. Now it looks like he's very much going to do that. He's been going on a book tour throughout the country, and it's really not an accident that he's going to a lot of these states that are going to be key primary states early on, mainly Iowa, Nevada, and New Hampshire. And I think he's probably going to visit South Carolina at some point soon. So he's really visiting all of the big first four states, and I think it's really indicative that he's trying to test the waters and sort of build a ground-up movement in order to support his presidential bid. So, he's done a number of these book tours. He's gotten really big crowds, so he is popular among the grassroots with conservatives in this state. I think the main million-dollar question throughout this entire primary process is, can Ron DeSantis actually beat Donald Trump in the primary? Because he really is Trump's major opponent. If you look at it, Nikki Haley, whoever else is mulling a run, Mike Pompeo, Chris Sununu, none of them really stand a chance to Donald Trump one-on-one. Ron DeSantis is the only person that I think is a powerful enough candidate to actually beat Trump in a head-to-head. Now, how likely is that? As of right now, I still think Donald Trump is the favorite for the nomination. Obviously, we've gotten a lot of polls recently that have had Trump up pretty big in a lot of national polls. Of course, state polls differ a little bit. Ron DeSantis is sort of leading at a lot of those, but Donald Trump still has a very solid base of support, and I think that's something that in some cases is underestimated, but in some cases I also think it's overestimated, because I think a lot of Republicans like both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, and that's something you're certainly not going to hear in some of these online or political spheres very much, who tend to lean one way or the other. A lot of conservatives and Republicans like both of these candidates. Now, as I mentioned before, Ron DeSantis has released a new book, The Courage to Be Free, which is a bestseller right now. But I think what's more important about the book itself is it's basically the blueprint to how Ron DeSantis built his brand in Florida, and it's ultimately a precursor as to how he wants to build his brand nationally if he is the Republican nominee. So I think it was really strategic that the book came out when it did. It obviously wasn't an accident to come out at this time, because in a couple of months, he's probably going to announce this run in May or June, and he really wants to build up the hype before that announcement. So obviously the book was a key part of that. I think also what's going to be very important to him is the Florida legislature and what he's able to get accomplished during the legislative session, which ends in May. So he's only got about 2 months to get a lot of big conservative policy victories in Florida to sort of bolster his claim to the Republican nomination. There's a heartbeat bill currently being considered in Florida, concealed carry, a number of big issues that will score big points with the conservative base of the Republican Party. So, looking at DeSantis as a candidate himself, again, if we go back to the 2022 midterms, really after I saw DeSantis crush Charlie Crist by 19 points, I knew there was certainly a mandate in the eyes of DeSantis and a lot of other Republicans to make this run. I mean, this is a colossal victory, and I believe it's something I talked about in my post-midterm video, but this was crushing. And, DeSantis did well in rural areas, he did better in suburban areas, he did better in urban areas, he did better across the board in every single county. He was winning safe blue counties like Palm Beach County. He won by 3 points. This was a county that just 4 years earlier, he lost by over 17. Miami-Dade, a county he lost by over 20 points. He ended up winning by 11. So Ron DeSantis shifted a lot of these areas in Florida massively to the right in just 4 years. Now, there's a number of factors that contribute to that. Obviously, there's been a net in-migration of a lot of conservative-leaning voters from blue states, especially after COVID. That's certainly ramped up. But I don't think you get a 19-point victory on that alone. DeSantis has built a unique brand in Florida. He's very popular, and it's something he hopes to translate to the national stage. This is why DeSantis feels this is his moment. He's basically at the peak of his popularity. He just came off of a massive re-election victory, and ultimately, it's now or never for Ron DeSantis, objectively speaking. In 2028, Ron DeSantis will be old news. A cautionary tale that relates to this is, of course, Kristi, who is a super popular governor in a blue state. Obviously, Florida's not a blue state, but, won re-election by 20 some odd points in New Jersey back in 2013. He was widely speculated to run for president in 2016. He did, but ultimately at that point, his popularity had taken a massive hit. And ultimately, Kristi was old news by then. He was basically at the end of his term, and nobody really cared about him anymore. And I think DeSantis is sort of avoiding that by putting his hat in the ring now. Now, obviously, it's a massive risk because either it's high risk or high reward when you think about it. Either DeSantis becomes the nominee and goes up against Biden, or he gets beaten by Trump and his political career essentially goes down in flames. I think it will be probably one or the other. And, it's interesting because if you looked at some of Trump's actions and comments, even leading up to the midterms and after the midterms, it was clear that even Trump knew that Ron DeSantis was going to run. He obviously wouldn't be attacking him so much on Truth Social if he thought Ron DeSantis wasn't a threat to him and wasn't going to actually run for president. So I think there were a number of signs early on leading up and through the 2022 midterms that indicated that DeSantis was going to go in this direction. And it really is incredible, the sort of meteoric rise of Ron DeSantis, because just 4 years ago, nobody really knew who Ron DeSantis was. He was in a tough race for governor. During a blue wave year, he was expected to lose. The polls had him down 7-8 points, and he ultimately ended up winning very narrowly, but he squeaked out a victory against Andrew Gillum by 0.4%, which is a pretty incredible feat when you consider the national environment. I mean, Republicans were losing governorships all across the country in red states like Kansas, swing states like Nevada, and places in the Rust Belt as well. So while Republicans were being beat nationally, Florida was sort of the state that bucked the trend. Now, of course, again, I think a lot of this was due to just demographics in the state of Florida, but DeSantis as a candidate obviously had to play a role. And you could argue even Trump's involvement in the state of Florida, given that it was becoming a redder state, even since the 2 years it had voted for Trump by just 1 percentage point, definitely played a factor in the general election as well. But, ultimately this primary is going to be very much like 2016 and less so like 2020. Again, as I mentioned earlier, objectively speaking, Donald Trump does not have a red carpet to the nomination. Now, that doesn't mean Donald Trump's not going to win the nomination or can't win the nomination or won't win it very comfortably at the end of the day. But as it looks right now, he does have some serious challengers. Nikki Haley is a somewhat serious challenger, although I don't think her winning the nomination is very likely at all. But she is the first big-name Republican to actually put her name in the race. Ron DeSantis, I really think, is the biggest challenger by far to Donald Trump because Ron DeSantis sort of peels away at the same voters that Donald Trump does very well, the sort of evangelical, conservative, populist right. That big umbrella, which in itself has various subgroups, but really it's the conservative vote. Nikki Haley is sort of vying for the more moderate sort of country club Republican vote. Yes, she's conservative on some of the social issues, but she's not on the same tier as somebody like Ron DeSantis. It's a very different dynamic. Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't really know much about him. I know he's an independent businessman. His whole campaign is really about stopping the woke or something like that, and political correctness, which I don't really think is a strong strategy in a Republican primary or nationally. But nonetheless, you never know. He's a very rich man. I believe he's a billionaire, so he could probably self-finance a lot of his campaign. But ultimately, his campaign seems very reminiscent of Andrew Yang, who sort of was this self-funded, very rich candidate who sort of brought new ideas and new perspectives into the primary. Really wasn't in it to win, but probably more so just to get his name out there, maybe to sell some books or something like that, but who knows. Anyway, I think DeSantis certainly is a force to be reckoned with throughout the primary, and we're going to talk about the Republican primary a lot as we go on throughout the rest of the year and into next year, because really, besides some of the elections happening this year, the governorships, the state legislative races, this is where everyone's focus is going to be on. And so far, we don't have a Democratic contested primary yet. I know Biden has a challenger, Marianne Williamson. I don't really think, however, she's a very serious threat to Joe Biden in the nomination. I think ultimately she's just there to sort of make a statement and try to push Biden a bit more to the left, but she doesn't have a realistic chance of taking out Biden if he decides to run for renomination, ultimately run for re-election. But either way, regardless if whether the nominee is Trump, DeSantis, or Nikki Haley, beating an incumbent president is very difficult. Now, some are arguing that we're on the precipice of some sort of economic recession or crash or something like that. That obviously changes things a little bit, but as a general rule of thumb, incumbent presidents don't lose, and when they lose, it's usually under special circumstances or they're just really unpopular. I don't think Joe Biden meets either of those criteria yet. I think he's still a slight favorite to actually win the presidential race. Now, obviously, it's March of 2023. A lot can change. But again, he's an incumbent president, and he now has that advantage, and the Republicans don't have that, so they have to put up a strong candidate to actually be able to beat Biden and take back the White House. So anyway, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.